What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to this week's edition of my top 25. Again, so sorry these videos didn't come out yesterday. I had some PowerPoints and things get corrupted and some graphics that I had to remake. Whatever, we are back now. Tomorrow, you will be getting my updated college football playoff predictions, sort of projecting the season outward, sort of as we wind out going forward here. And then we'll dive on into some predictions for games this week. Again, tomorrow you can look forward to my updated college football playoff predictions. But today we're going to dive on into my top 25. A lot of shuffling after a chaotic second weekend in November. Before we do that, you guys know I have to run through my spiel. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and just showing your support in any way you can. If you want to help support the channel directly here on YouTube, do anything you can to interact with it. It'll all help to support it. Biggest thing you can do, obviously, is subscribe and ring the bell if you haven't done so already. Whether you've been thinking about it, you're a first-time viewer, highly encourage you to do it, especially if you're as big of a college football nerd as I am. Continue watching my videos, just like you're taking time out of, I'm sure, your busy day to watch this one right here. I appreciate it so much. It helps out the channel more than you can even know, and you can like, you can comment, you can share. And if you want to support me outside of YouTube, go give me a follow on Twitter or X. It's at Tailgate29, and I'm going to start posting pretty regularly, hopefully. Again, trying to figure out how I want to do that and lay out a plan and everything. But I'll be showing you everything else I do within the sports media realm over on Twitter if you guys would like to follow me. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into the top 25. And honestly, the honorable mention list, not going to take us too long. We did have a couple teams drop out of the poll. That was Pitt and Iowa State. Both of those teams were not rated this past, were rated this past week that were not rated in this week's poll. Vanderbilt, the other team of that, but they're not really close compared to any of these other teams. If there was to be a 31st spot, I mean, yeah, you could put Vanderbilt on the honorable mention list here, absolutely, but I decided not to include them. For this standpoint, Iowa State and Pitt, what happened, man? These are two teams that you could put up in, in the upper echelon of both of their conferences and then spots to compete for the college football playoff. But you see this sometimes in college football with teams that surprisingly start out undefeated. They get one loss, and then everything just starts to spiral. That's what happened to Pitt after they lost to SMU, lost to Virginia this past week, and Iowa State, who lost to Texas Tech, just lost to Kansas this past week. So we'll see if they can bounce back, build some momentum this upcoming week. Pitt has got Clemson. That's a very important game. And then Iowa State here. Give me 1 second. I'll tell you who the Iowa State Cyclones have to play. They got the Cincinnati Bearcats, so definitely an interesting test there for Iowa State. We'll see if both teams can bounce back. And, of course, some of the Group of 5 mainstays, Tulane. I was this close, so that tells you if I had a 26th spot, it would go to the Tulane Green Wave. And then Louisiana's there, the best team out of the Sun Belt. And then UNLV, still one of the top teams in the Group of 5. Not the best team in the Mountain West, because obviously there's Boise State, but UNLV absolutely deserving of an honorable mention spot. Again, I told you that wouldn't take us too long, so let's just go ahead, dive right on into the top 25. Again, guys, I still don't feel great about it, but Missouri does have a spot in the top 25 now. They are number 25. They got a win over the Oklahoma Sooners this past week that they honestly probably shouldn't have. There was a ton of things that happened late in that game, and Missouri scored, I think, twice in 2 minutes. There was the scoop and score to take the just absolutely surprising lead on Oklahoma late. And the Sooners, I mean, no better way to say it. They just found another way to lose a game. Oklahoma's found ways to lose games a lot this year. They did it again in that one. And, I mean, Missouri, they're sitting at 7-2. If they win out, they could be sitting up there amongst an 8-way tie for the top of the SEC if that chaos were to unfold. And I'm going to dive more in to the SEC chaos field in another video that I'm actually going to be uploading this week. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But, I mean, yeah, Missouri's just a team. Don't feel great about them being in the top 25, but honestly, I really have no better option. Sure, you could put Tulane. Sure, you could put Louisiana, but at the end of the day, Missouri's got the better resume. They have the quote-unquote better losses because, I mean, come on, they're 2 losses to Bama and Texas A&M, 2 teams that most people are going to have inside of their top 15, at very least top 20. So that's why Missouri sits here at number 25. But I do think not enough love is being shown to the Arizona State Sun Devils. And I got to say, what a job Kenny Dillingham has done with this program this year. Now, Arizona State's got a very interesting game because they got to go on the road to play Kansas State. They still have BYU left, and that road game against Arizona, I know the Wildcats have not been the best team this year, but you can't discount them. That's still a very talented group. Arizona State, a lot would have to happen in order for them to get into a Big 12 championship game. But if they win out, they give themselves a pretty solid shot. And I haven't really touched on this team much on the channel this year. Sam Leavitt's been the quarterback this year. I mean, he's been okay. He hasn't really been spectacular. It's been Cam Scattaboo, that running back that has been absolutely phenomenal, is one of the leaders in the country in terms of all-purpose yards. He does a little bit of everything. He can run the ball. He can catch the ball. Very dynamic weapon. He's got Arizona State in a really, really good position, as does this defense, which isn't going to wow you with its pass rush, isn't going to wow you with its turnover margin, but it does the little things right. And the Sun Devils, welcome to the top 25 this year. Same thing here with South Carolina. The Gamecocks, you just felt like eventually South Carolina was going to win one of those big games, and that's exactly what happened a couple of weeks ago there against the Texas A&M Aggies, and South Carolina beat a team that I had in my top 25 in the Vanderbilt Commodores this past week. South Carolina extends that win streak over Vanderbilt, and I mean, you take a look at South Carolina, close loss there to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Yeah, they kind of got blown out by Ole Miss there at home, but then a close loss to the LSU Tigers. They have a win on the road over Kentucky, a win on the road over Oklahoma, and a win on the road over Vanderbilt, and their one win in SEC play at home being against the Texas A&M Aggies. Not too shabby at all. The Gamecocks are welcome into the top 25. Finally now, the Louisville Cardinals have jumped up there to number 22. They jump up 3 spots just courtesy of other teams falling below them. Do not believe Louisville had a game this past week. No, they did not. I'll tell you who Louisville has to close out the season here. They got Stanford coming up this next week. The game against Pitt could be interesting. And then on the road against Kentucky, again, a rivalry game that they usually struggle with. Not much to say on Louisville. They move up 3 spots because some other teams fell out of the poll, and that's why they sit there at number 22. I did not move Kansas State this past week. Kansas State is going to have Arizona State coming up this week, as you just heard me mention a little bit ago. They were on bye this past week. Now, Kansas State, they might need some things to go their way as well, especially Colorado needing to lose one more game, and you're probably pinpointing if they are going to lose a game, it's going to end up being that road game against the Kansas Jayhawks that does Colorado in, because Kansas State holds that tiebreaker. They're going to want Colorado to lose an extra game, but they still got some interesting games themselves. Arizona State, Kansas, and Iowa State. I mean, that upset loss to Houston, yeesh, if that didn't happen, we're talking about Kansas State probably in the top 15 and looking to even maybe get an at-large bid into the college football playoff, even if they didn't win their conference. That might be, might be a little bit of a stretch, but Avery Johnson's starting to come on, play really well. We'll see what Kansas State has in store. Really interesting schedule for them down the stretch. Again, a personal matchup of top 25 teams between the Sun Devils and Wildcats coming up here this week. LSU falls 8 spots. Now, I told you last week I had both teams below the SMU Mustangs. Whichever team won was going to jump above SMU. Whichever team lost was going to plummet. And LSU absolutely plummets. That's their 3rd loss now. They also have a loss on the schedule, to which, I mean, you probably say, I mean, what were you doing losing that game to LSU, or I say the Miller Moss and USC in the first week there of the season? And LSU just can't defend the quarterback run. Even in a win, they couldn't defend Lenora Sellers on the ground. They could not defend the Texas A&M quarterback. That's why the pause there. His name is escaping my mind. Marcel Reed. That's it. They couldn't defend Marcel Reed on the ground. And then they just allowed Jalen Milroe, one of, if not the best dual threat quarterback in the country, to go for 4 touchdowns on the ground and average over 15 yards per carry. That's not going to get it done. LSU's only shot now is to hope they win some tiebreakers and find a way into Atlanta in the SEC championship game. I think they are out of contention for a at-large spot. You got Washington State up here at 19. I don't have much to say about the Cougars. They got a win over Utah State this week. The only thing that I'll probably say about Washington State every single week is they're going to need a lot of things to happen, but if they want to get into the college football playoff, you probably need Boise State to lose, and you're rooting for SEC doomsday. You're rooting for the ACC and the Big 12 to be one-bid leagues. You're rooting for one of those Big 10 teams to wind up with 2 losses outside of the conference championship game, which, I mean, you probably have to root for Indiana at this point just because of strength of schedule, but Washington State needs a lot to happen. They're going to wind up in a good bowl game regardless if they don't make the playoff. It's been a very impressive team to watch this year. If they win out, they give themselves a shot, but with no true Pac-12 championship game this season, Well, Washington State's going to be hoping and praying for a little bit of a miracle on their end. Colorado, though, they are in firm control of their own destiny. They're up 5 spots from last week's poll. Guys, it's time we start talking about the Buffaloes as some college football playoff contenders. I think the only way that they would get in is if they won their conference. And right now they are on a collision course with BYU. Again, there are a lot of things that can happen. Still a lot of football left to be played. Maybe Colorado, if they went out, even lose the Big 12 title, they have a shot. But at that point, it's their third loss. And I think you would put in any 2-loss SEC team that didn't make the conference title over Colorado just based on resumes and how the teams have looked and so on and so forth. The line of scrimmage play has improved, not horribly improved. That's going to wow you or anything like, wow, that's such a big turnaround. I mean, the offensive line's gotten a little bit better. It's still allowing almost 30 sacks this season, or has allowed almost 30 sacks this season. Defensive front, though, it's starting to create pressure. You have some really good playmakers, the Sanders brothers, the quarterback Shadur, and of course, the defensive back in Shiloh. Travis Hunter is going to be in the front running for the Heisman Trophy this year. And Colorado, again, they got some interesting games. Utah this week, on the road against Kansas the following week. That's the game you got to circle, especially because the Jayhawks are coming off that upset win. But if Colorado can get to the Big 12 title game, they give themselves a shot for Coach Prime to get into the college football playoff, which I think some media people out there would not like that much, but I think it'd be a lot of fun for the college football world. Army, what more do you want me to say? I want to talk actually for 2 seconds, a little bit longer than that literally, but 2 seconds about how Army controlled the clock against North Texas. Yes, they only won the game 14-3. It's not going to wow you. It's not going to say, Army, they are still a college football playoff contender. If something were to happen to Boise State, they can absolutely get that spot as the highest ranked conference champion because they are on a collision course with Tulane right now to meet in the American Athletic Championship game. But for the Army Black Knights, the way that they were able to control that clock, they had a 10-minute and 50-second drive in the game against North Texas, and it wasn't even their longest drive of the game. They controlled the clock for almost 14 minutes on one drive. There was like 11 minutes left in the third quarter when the drive started and 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter when the drive ended, or maybe I flip-flopped those two timestamps, which actually sounds more right now. 10 minutes left in the third to 11 minutes left in the fourth, and it was a touchdown drive. Army's been spectacular this year. They're up 2 spots to number 17. And I got Clemson rounding out here everything below the top 15. Clemson is at 16. And hey, with the Miami loss, Clemson right now they have the benefit of playing an extra conference game to where they are the team that sits above Miami in the conference standings right now. But that's going to be really interesting to watch if the favorites win out from this point on, because Clemson and Miami, right now SMU, if they went out, they're in the ACC title game, book it, end of story. But Clemson and Miami, they didn't play this year. They're not going to play this year. And so it would come down to tiebreakers, maybe some common opponents, maybe some point differentials. However it works out, one of the two, Clemson or Miami, if SMU wins out, is going to miss out on the ACC championship game, which I find really, really fascinating. So, the Clemson right now, with the Miami loss to Georgia Tech, putting themselves in some pretty good positions right now. If they went out, they give themselves at least a shot. And then again, it just depends on how tiebreakers work out. And maybe they can start to get back into that conversation for a at-large bid. It seems like everyone has a loss that they shouldn't, it has a game they shouldn't have lost on their resume. Clemson being the one to the Louisville Cardinals. But let's continue up. Not going to talk much about Texas A&M or Boise State. Neither of them moved. Both of them have still been pretty impressive so far this year. Texas A&M still in a really good position to get into the SEC championship game as they only have one loss. They went out the rest of the way. They have Auburn and Texas left on the conference schedule. And of course, they win that, they get in. And Boise State, Ashton Jeanty had another 200-yard, another 3-touchdown game. They are the front runners in the group of 5 right now by far. And right now for me, number 14, because this is where the top 25 starts to get really, really interesting. So Miami, I had at number 5 this past week. Miami had been the epitome of survive and advance, because you just take a look at what Miami has done this season and what Miami has sort of gone through. There's just a ton of close calls here, and it's led to, some impressive wins, sure, but nothing really eye-opening, nothing that's going to stand out. Their best win definitely is that road win against Louisville, because Louisville is a ranked team now, and the College Football Playoff Committee will likely be ranking them on Tuesday. They have a win over Duke. It's a 22-point win at the end of the day, but Duke did make that one a battle. But a close win against Virginia Tech, a close win against Cal. They didn't really struggle with Florida. They went on the road and pummeled Florida. I think that's going to look like a semi-impressive win of sorts. But you go on the road and lose to Georgia Tech. You couldn't survive that one. And who knows, maybe you have to survive in that last week of the season on the road against Syracuse. Kyle McCord and that team, besides a couple performances here and there, have looked really, really good. And Kyle McCord, one of the leading passers in college football right now. It's just a really interesting conversation when you talk about Miami because, again, depending on how tiebreakers work out, if them and Clemson and SMU both win out, or I should say all three went out at that point, SMU is going to be in the ACC title game. One of Clemson or Miami is going to be sitting at home. And at that point, I think the pressure is on Miami now. I talked about this in my weekly takeaway video earlier today, but all the pressure in the world is sitting right here for Miami. They need to win out. They need to find a way in the ACC title game, and they need to win that thing because the way they've looked all season, continuing to pull out wins, eventually is going to catch up with them, and it did last week against a pretty darn feisty Georgia Tech team. I believe they just secured bowl eligibility in that one. Yes, they did, but this makes the ACC conversation a whole lot more interesting, and it's because SMU, no, they didn't drop one spot because they lost. No, they didn't drop one spot because they didn't look good. I actually don't even believe that SMU had a game this past weekend. No, they did not. So SMU is going to end up playing Boston College. They also have Virginia, and then they have California to close out the regular season. All three very winnable games. If they do their job, they're going to get in the ACC title game, and right now, they're the ACC frontrunners. I still think Miami, odds favorite, probably going to end up being the favorite in Vegas, but SMU right now, man, sitting in prime spot for a college football playoff position, especially with all the chaos in the SEC. Who knows? Maybe if they don't even win the thing, they can get an at-large bid. That's definitely something that now is going to have to be in contention. Georgia. Let's talk about the Georgia Bulldogs for 1 second. They were at 3 last week, and much like Miami, they fell 8 spots from the previous week. And it's not because, well, I think Georgia's this team that now is going to have to fight to get into the college football playoff. I mean, they are. They really are going to have to fight to try to get an at-large bid in here. But, I mean, when I take a look at the Georgia Bulldogs right now, I kind of see... this is a team that's got a lot of problems. The run game is not as good as what Georgia's run game has been in the past. In fact, I'll even go as far to say it might not even be good enough to compare with some of the other run games that we see across the country this season. That Georgia defense has been hit or miss. They haven't really been there sometimes. They've been there other times. But the Georgia pass rush has come back to life. Main problem, though, being Carson Beck. This is not the quarterback that we saw last season. He has been detrimental to Georgia this year. He threw some picks against Texas that helped. I should say he threw some picks against Texas. Didn't really matter. Texas offense was stagnant, but the game against Bama, yeah, it certainly cost him in this past game against Ole Miss. A pick, a fumble. It definitely cost Georgia here. He's got to figure things out. Georgia's a team that still has everything in front of them. They play Tennessee. They win that game. They round out the SEC schedule. They can hope for the chaos scenario where things tie. Maybe they get a bid. I think if Georgia does their job, they're going to get an at-large bid. But man, now things are getting really scary in Athens, and that rounds out my top, or I should say that rounds out 11 through 15. Now on into the top 10. This is where I have to put the Ole Miss Rebels, and it's just in terms of the standings thing, right? Ole Miss beat Georgia, so Ole Miss is going to be in front of Georgia at this point. Although you could argue that Ole Miss has got a questionable loss in there because, of course, there is that loss to Kentucky. If they don't have that loss, well, they're probably sitting in a lot of people's top 5s, if not top 4s right now. But the fact of it is they have that loss. Georgia still just hasn't looked well. The Ole Miss offense still doesn't look fully 100%, and I know it's because Trey Harris is battling some injuries and things right now, but the Ole Miss defense is great. It held Georgia to only, I think, 250 yards, maybe less, of total offense. The pass rush was able to get back to Carson Beck. I think once Jackson Dart and this offense refined their rhythm, they're going to be a threat to watch out for. And I mean, come on, guys. It's just doomsday in the SEC right now because you take a look at the way that this conference is shaping out. I've talked about it many times before, and now it's starting to get more national the attention in terms of what could happen, we could potentially have an 8-way tie where 8 teams have 2 conference losses. 8 teams go 6-2 in SEC play, which I think is absolutely bonkers. Ole Miss can be one of them. So can the Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama is sitting here at 4-2. They just beat the brakes off of LSU. And Alabama now, probably besides the Tennessee Volunteers, put themselves in the best opportunity out of anyone in the SEC to get that first round, or not first round bye. That would end up being Texas, but to get that at-large bid, right? If that SEC chaos scenario does happen, and you were to tell me, okay, you can pick at least one SEC team that is completely safe, no doubt in your mind, they are going to be one of the 12 teams in the college football playoff. At this point in time right now, guys, I would have to say the Alabama Crimson Tide, just because you look at the rest of their schedule, Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn. I don't see them losing any one of those games. In fact, I don't see any one of those games even being competitive. Maybe the Oklahoma game, a little bit of a trap game, but I don't see Alabama struggling with any of those teams. I think Alabama has put themselves in the great spot. Kalen DeBoer, after all the questions, after all the performances to where they've struggled. I mean, look, you take a look at it. Yes, Vanderbilt, that's going to be a bad loss. But, I mean, Ole Miss has got a bad loss this year. Notre Dame, who I have at 6, has got a bad loss this year, guys. It seems like everyone has a bad loss this year, so you can't really judge teams on their bad loss. You have to judge teams on who they've beat. Well, Bama, they've beat Georgia. They beat Missouri. They just beat the brakes off of LSU. They beat South Carolina, who's ranked now on the road against Wisconsin. That's a Power 4 road win. And then, yeah, maybe you struggled with Tennessee. You didn't quite pull that out. You struggled with South Carolina. Well, I already mentioned that. You beat South Carolina even though you struggled. Tennessee, you have the loss. The SEC, I mean, we're going to have to dive on into this in a different video because there's just so much to unpack within the SEC right now. So we're going to move on. I told you Notre Dame is at 6, so I'll talk about them really briefly. They just beat the brakes off of another team. I'm really loving that phrase today, by the way, but they absolutely put the smack down last week on the Florida State Seminoles. They'll have an opportunity to do that against Virginia, and then they can get a defining win against the Army Black Knights. They can possibly end Army's undefeated season and get a top 25 win on the resume. Not Notre Dame doesn't already have one. They do have that win against Louisville. They have a road win against Georgia Tech where they looked very impressive. And, of course, the road win against Texas A&M is good on their resume as well. Notre Dame, ever since that Northern Illinois loss, has been rolling, and I think they're proven to be one of the better teams in the country this year. BYU, they survive, man, and now BYU is still above Indiana because of who they've played, right? Going on the road in Rice-Eccles Stadium, still, in my opinion, is more impressive than anything Indiana has done in that game alone, and that's not even counting the fact that BYU has top 25 wins on their resume. BYU is still in the driver's seat in the Big 12 Conference. Yes, they had to survive this week, but who hasn't had to survive at least one game this year? A lot of the teams in the top 5 have had to survive some games this year, but I mean, look, you look at it, they have a win over SMU, who's the front runner in the ACC right now in terms of conference standings. They have a win over Kansas State. They have a couple other really good road wins here. And they're going to have a chance to pick up some other resume boosters. Kansas, 3-6, but not as bad as their record says they are. On the road against Arizona State, if the committee happens to rank the Sun Devils, that will be a fascinating game. And then Indiana, you talk about them, their toughest test of the year probably was that game against the Michigan Wolverines, and their offense struggled against a really good defense. It makes you slightly concerned for how Indiana is going to play the Ohio State Buckeyes, and obviously you're concerned in general if you're a Hoosier fan because it's Ohio State on the road. It is going to be, I think, big noon kickoff. That just got announced, but BYU is ahead of Indiana. Both of them are undefeated, I know, but BYU's got the better resume right now. I just think Notre Dame is a better football team, and I also do think they have the better resume than both BYU and Indiana. That's why they are at number 6. Into the top 5. Number 5 was really hard to figure out for me, and honestly, for me, it was between Tennessee or Notre Dame. I decided to go with Tennessee here because, again, if you're going to wind up comparing the two resumes, well, Tennessee's got a win over a team that I would consider in the top 10 right now in the Alabama Crimson Tide. They've got a couple other pretty solid wins, and they only got one loss on the year, and if you're going to compare them and Notre Dame, their loss is definitely the, quote, better loss. On the road against Arkansas, tough environment in the SEC's been chaos this year, while Notre Dame lost at home to a Northern Illinois team that I don't even know if they're going to wind up making a bowl game this year. Now, Tennessee, the rest of the way, has got Georgia this week. If Tennessee can get through that, they're probably in the SEC championship game on the road against Vanderbilt. I wouldn't discount that one. And then you play UTEP, you're going to beat the brakes off of the UTEP Miners. But Tennessee, look, if they get past this game against Georgia, it does one of two things. One, it probably cements Tennessee at very least either in the SEC championship game or in the college football playoff, and it probably eliminates the Georgia Bulldogs from playoff contention, which would be absolutely crazy. That would be crazy. This is going to be such a fun game to watch this week. Again, when you compare Tennessee and Notre Dame, well, Tennessee's got wins over, at the time, a ranked Oklahoma, at the time, a ranked NC State. You can look at it and say neither of those teams are any good, but that's just what they have on their resume. And yeah, they've struggled. They needed overtime to get past Florida. They struggled a little bit with Kentucky, but they have a win over the Alabama Crimson Tide, and they have opportunity to pick up some other pretty big wins here down the line. The top four, to me, there is no question whatsoever, and I'm not going to linger on it too much. Penn State at 4, Texas at 3, and then Ohio State, Oregon are 1 and 2. Oregon at number 1 is cemented in stone. There is no way you are moving Oregon right now, and I don't think you're moving Oregon the rest of the season. They got Wisconsin on the road, possible trap game, and you've seen teams struggle with a ton of different looks this year, and just a ton of different teams have struggled in a ton of different environments. You can take a look at anyone within the SEC, and they've seemed to have had one bad game. But Oregon, yeah, they've had to survive. They had to survive early in the year against Idaho. They had to survive early in the year against Boise State. But since they've gotten in Big Ten play, they've been terrific. They're absolutely the number 1 team in the country. Ohio State, I think, is cementing themselves at number 2. Their only loss being on the road to the Oregon Ducks by 1 point. And I know some people out there, well, they had to survive against Nebraska. Again, there have been teams throughout the SEC that have had to survive this year. Notre Dame has had to survive this year. A ton of other teams. Miami is the epitome of a survive and advance team this year, and they couldn't get the job done this past week. Ohio State, to me, is the number 2 team. Texas is the number 3 team for the absolute same reason, and they got some great wins on the resume so far. And again, I know Michigan has not panned out that well, but a win on the road in Ann Arbor, that's still a Power 4 road win. And Texas, as long as they do their job, they got Arkansas, Kentucky, and Texas A&M up left. As long as they win all 3 of those games, they are in the SEC championship game. Again, Texas A&M could very well be a play-in game for Atlanta. But Texas' only losses come against Georgia. Not a bad loss, and I know Georgia's hasn't seemed like Georgia this year, for lack of better terminology, I suppose. But Texas is still a really good team. They deserve number 3 in Penn State, their only loss being at home to Ohio State by a single touchdown. Not too bad, right? So top 4 for me is pretty easy. 5 and beyond is where it gets really, really muddy, because you can make a whole bunch of different cases for a whole bunch of different teams. This has been an absolutely fascinating season of college football. Please let me know if you want me to dive on into any one team, any one conference in the comment section down below, because as we get down the line, I'll probably do fewer and fewer game previews, but I'll probably be doing a whole lot more. Let's look at this conference. Let's look at the playoff matchups. Let's look at the playoff chances, so on and so forth. So let me know of any video you guys really want me to do, any ideas you may have. But thank you for watching this edition of the Tailgate Nate Top 25. Again, my personal top 25. You can change whatever you wish, because everyone can make their own personal top 25. And it's not a reflection of how I think the playoff rankings are going to shape out. It's just the way I would rank the best 25 teams. So, hey, look forward to my college football playoff predictions coming out tomorrow. We'll start moving on to some game preview and predictions. Maybe some other fun videos later on this week as well. But remember to play hard but tailgate harder. See all you guys in the next video. Goodbye.